Hello, everybody. Glad you could join us for episode number 27 of the Launch and Beyond podcast, a podcast designed to support you not only achieving great success in your business, but also in other areas of life as well. This week's topic is one that's relevant to a lot of people, not only to entrepreneurs and business owners. It's a challenge that shows up in particular with high achievers and people who have achieved a high level of success that they may not quite be comfortable with. According to one author, up to 30% of highly successful people experience this problem and may increase their chances of experiencing anxiety, depression, and significantly impacting their potential. It shows up equally across gender, different age categories, and different cultures. I've experienced it myself personally. I've identified and helped address it with many of my coaching clients that I've worked with as well. Are you curious what I'm talking about? If so, stick with us on this episode when we discuss and outline strategies to deal with what is commonly referred to as imposter syndrome. We hope you enjoy it. So Adam, we've got a great topic we're going to be covering this episode. Really excited to be deep diving into this one. I'll certainly be laying bare some of the things that I've learnt in living through this imposter syndrome. But how about we check in to see how we're going? It's a couple of weeks since we recorded last. Both of us last week knew in ourselves that we just weren't in the headspace and prepared for it. So what's been going on for the last 2 weeks?
Well, not to be too political too early, but the second we had to have that mandatory mask, it felt like I was muzzled. So again, I didn't have that creative flow, and I think I can't speak for you, but I felt like you had a bit of a creative flow as well. You put out so much content between Lux and the podcast that I was thinking about. I can't believe how much content that you do provide. So I understand when you get like in a little rut because you've just put so much of yourself out into the universe. But yeah, it's been a really long week, lots of ups and downs, like more downs this week than ups. So it's been testing, and I was lucky enough. I got an adjustment before we started the podcast, and I feel like that released every part of my tension. And then you were nice enough to sit down and just like debrief me before we got into this. So I'm like, my mind's just calmed again.
Clearer.
Yeah.
You're clearer.
Yeah. I was actually going to bring beers in today. Like that's how like scattered my brain was feeling before this, but now I'm all nice and ready. And like,
we just had to get grounded. That's really what it was. So, and it's interesting you say that because you're right. Between the different roles that I have, I just knew in myself that I wasn't in my best state.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because the last recording we did, which was fantastic, was about turning pro.
Yeah.
And professionals will turn up and deliver. And even with that, I just knew in my heart that I just wasn't. And we made a commitment to each other that we're not going to go through the motions. We're not going to deliver something that we feel we wouldn't be proud of.
Yep.
And so consequently, we record these in advance. So we've got a couple of episodes up our sleeves for that reason. Because if we just don't creatively feel like we can be there and present, and I think it's respecting the people who are listening to our podcast. They're not short podcasts.
Yeah.
And if someone's going to invest time listening to it, in my opinion, you just want to make sure that they're getting the best that we've got. And that's all I would hope anybody would understand is we're giving you the best we've got.
Yeah.
And last week was not it. And so it was easier to just can it and say, look, I'm sitting out this week. So, and for me, it was probably a process of that. I think that, there's changes that's going on. There's uncertainty, and I just had so many moving parts in so many different areas of my life and world that I felt that I couldn't show up in that capacity. So this is the whole purpose of it, where we've got backups in place. So we still honor the agreements that we have to each other. We deliver a podcast and release one every week. So we're not honoring what we said we'd do, but because we've got a few in place, we've got some breathing room.
And that's what we wanted to do was to respect our listeners and to make sure that we were giving our best every time we turned up. And if we weren't going to give our best, we'd work on ourselves to come back and give our best the next time around. So, and I feel like, I started the day a bit muddled, but we're here and we're recording. And as I said to Jim, as I was driving here today, I knew I was going to be creative, and my mind just sort of just burst out in all this stuff that I hadn't said for 2 weeks because we hadn't recorded anything. So I'm just like, I'm full, I'm fresh. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah, and I was the same. I feel ready for today, and that's the whole purpose of that as well. So, how about we get started?
Yeah, let's go for
Let's
it.
get started. So today we're talking about the imposter syndrome, which I mentioned at the start of the podcast, is something that's actually quite common, and particularly for people who, interestingly, have had a level of success, and specifically, they may not have had a level of success. Oh, sorry, they're not comfortable with that. And I'm going to start off the bat by mentioning it. This is something that I experienced very, very early on. I mentioned that when I finished university and graduated, and went into a role that we were very successful in very quickly, and within a short period of time, I remember waking up one day and going in and taking care of people and looking after people. That was in the early stages of my professional health career, and I'm responsible for people, and I'm in a really responsible role. And I remember thinking, how did I get to here? Or I felt like the little kid in the adult's body, going, I don't know how I got here. How's it respectable? They're gonna find out that I'm not really who I'm saying I am, and why that was relevant is because I used to have this recurring dream all the time that there was when we in first year of my chiropractic course, when we first started, there was a lecturer, and she was an absolute assassin. It was so hard. She was so difficult. She was tiny. She was like 4 foot, and yet commanded an aura that would make grown men cry. And
A
she was
six
just
foot four guy.
hand on heart, man. I'll let you know that she struck fear into everybody.
Yeah.
She was a beautiful Sri Lankan lady, and but she just commanded this presence, and she but struck fear and terror into everybody. And so when we lecture one, day one of this course, she just blew us apart. And we've walked. I remember walking out and going, "What the hell have I just done?" I know this is all I ever wanted to do up until this point. Man, I've got no idea what she's talking about at all. And this is day one. And so my recurring dream, I remember 3 years out of graduating, was I'd had this recurring dream that I got a call from the course, the uni, saying, "Hey, listen, we've just gone back through that first year subject, and we've realized you actually didn't pass. So you have to come back and repeat the whole program again." And I was like, "What the hell's going on? Why am I having this dream now?" It was because I hadn't reconciled the role that I was in, and I felt like I was playing grown-ups in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. And because my level of esteem and my level of worthiness at that point hadn't matched up with the reality, that's what was going on. So it was playing out subconsciously in my mind in that. And you know, I remember coming in and turning up and to the office, and just feeling like at any one time you're just going to realize that I'm not really that good. I'm not really. I'm playing. That's what it felt like, and I had to do a lot of work to identify that process. And what helped me is by unearthing that, helped to address that. It was an esteem issue. It was just getting comfortable with that. And the moment that I did that, and I'll explain why I did that a little bit later on when I'm explaining the different modalities of that, that changed everything for me. Have you ever had an experience like that at all?
Uh, a little. I don't think so too much. Like not the syndrome. I think from a young age it was sort of like. Have you seen the movie from Jim Carrey, the Yes Man?
Yeah.
I feel like I've always just said yes to every situation
Right.
because I always wanted to be around. So I've always been an imposter in situations where I shouldn't have been because it didn't seem right on paper.
Yep.
But I just went there anyway. Like
Yep.
you're talking about studying. Like when I was at uni, I would never turn up to my course, but I'd always go to the nursing course. Well, there was a reason
Yep.
for I going to the nursing side, but I'd be in classes like anatomy just because I'd crash them because I thought that was way more interesting than business.
Yep.
And what do we talk about? We talk about business, but in the school situation, I never got value from that the lecturer talking about some Friedman's management principles because I was managing a team of people already, and I'm like,
Mm.
yeah, that relates to some people, but doesn't relate to majority. I
Yep.
saw that the teachings were different, so I would go into different classes, so I would knowingly become an imposter.
Mm.
And then through my through my school days, like playing footy and soccer, I didn't play it for a majority of the school, and then I started in the later years because I wanted that team sort of surroundings. I never felt out of place because I'm like, I'm putting in the work. I belong here, and it's. I was reading the topic, and I've seen a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of people, and I've guided them through this situation. So I know a fair bit of why people feel this, but for me, I haven't really felt it too much. I don't think.
Mm. Yeah,
And that's to be honest. Like
yeah,
I
no,
don't
but
want to
that's what
sit
we want.
here and pretend that oh yeah, I've been an imposter. I feel like I've worked hard enough and got to
Mm.
rooms or got to positions and go. This is above me, but this is growing me into the person I need to be.
Yep.
And I've reprogrammed my mind to believe it to be
Yep.
that way.
Yeah, and in its essence, that's effectively what you need to do,
Yeah.
right? So there's the part, and this is the part that shows up for a lot of people. You mentioned the word one word before, and that's belonging. And that's if you don't feel like you belong, it that's when it'll show up more,
Yeah.
right? So that was really what it was for me because like with the background that I had, right? It took me a long time. I think I might have mentioned at some stage there's a another phenomenon called Sunny syndrome,
Yeah.
and the Sunny syndrome. Have I mentioned that before?
Maybe.
Maybe. All right. So
So
Sunny syndrome is when you're kind of like acting like the inner child,
mm,
right? In between. So you're kind of an adult, but there's still the inner child stuff. And the Sunny syndrome was for me what was showing up, particularly in this context, and it relates to imposter syndrome. Was I had the story and the validation of the migrant kid, and within a short period of time, I had an opportunity that I know my family never had, and here I am earning 10 times what my dad is earning in a period of time. And it took me a little while to get comfortable with that.
yeah.
Right.
You've mentioned this
Right.
to
So
me
that's
as well. Yeah.
sunny
Yeah.
syndrome, right? So that's what that is. And so I think that's what it was. I had to, and this is part of the focus of why we have the podcast in this way, basically saying it's all well and good to have success in one metric, but if you haven't had commensurate growth in yourself in other areas, you won't be able to hold it.
Mm,
You won't be able to maintain it. And I was at high at risk of that because what'll play out for a lot of people is they'll start sabotaging. And we'll talk about that as we go on. But fundamentally, that's what I realized I was doing. Or you start shining, you're trying to stay underneath the radar because you're not quite comfortable with that. And you basically only grow to the level of your self-esteem. And if you haven't calibrated that, but what you were doing is you're telling a story about no matter where I am, I'll find a way. That's an
yeah.
empowering story around it, right? The different story that I realized that I was doing that I had to change was the one about how the hell did you get here, dude? Do you belong here? And if that's the metric through which you're running your life, that's going to show up a lot. And even if you're hardworking, successful, you've got a capacity constraint about what you're going to get to or be able to hold on to because of that narrative you tell yourself about yourself.
Well, look at my situation. When I had my bakery, I was a small corner shop bakery in a bunch of shopping strips, right? And it was in the north of Melbourne. It was 25 kilometers from the city. And our furthest customer was 10 Ks down the road. And that was, big deal. We served people outside of our postcode. And then I went from there to getting the factory. And the factory was a nationwide business, it was a national business. The jump up was massive. And I still stay under the radar at the moment. And it's not because I don't have the esteem, it's because I'm building my systems and
Mm,
structures to go, once I can confidently go, hey, we can scale up to double the amount of production, that's when I'll be loud.
mm,
That's when I'll be
mm,
boisterous.
mm,
But already I've started, like, we've got these face masks. Instead of me putting on just a normal one, I've got custom company logoed.
mm.
I've got one for the podcast as well. You'll be getting it next week. But yeah, I know we're all joyous about that. But I've got that because I'm now building that brand. I've got hoodies. Every picture you see, it's got a branded something of mine in there. And now that I'm getting comfortable enough going, we can double what we can produce. I'm going to be loud. I'm going to be
Right.
boisterous. I'm going to come out and I'm going to go, yeah, I'm here now. And I stayed under the radar, not because I felt like an imposter. It was
Mm.
strategic.
Yep.
And I know we're talking about imposter, but this is how I've changed my mindset
Yep.
to go,
Yep.
hey, I'm not I belong here. I
Yep.
belong on the national scale, and
Yep.
soon enough, hopefully, on the international
Yep.
scale.
And what basically you're doing is really the pathway to what it is that we would hope people take out of today
Yeah.
is the strategy. That's what I actually had to go through myself to work out and to identify those areas that were holding me back to be able to then move forward and yeah. So I agree with you. I now not only do I deserve a seat at the table, I actually own the table,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And that, but that was a process. I had to really work hard at that. Once I identified that this is why this is showing up for me,
yeah.
right? So let's
Well,
talk. Sorry, go.
so I feel like, you know, you mentioned you were an immigrant kid,
Mm,
and I've always been a heavy set guy, and I feel that we've just been the hardest workers in the room, or competing with the hardest worker in the room all the time to earn our right to be
mm,
on that table
yep,
or running that table. And I think that's a key. I know we're going to go over it,
yep,
but yeah, be the hardest worker in the
yep,
room, and then you never feel like you're an imposter.
yeah. And that is like well,
We're going over
well,
it.
I'm
I
going to
know.
come back.
I'm jumping in early.
That's cool. I'm going to come back to this because yeah, if purely because it'll make sense in a moment. How what you just said is spot on. That's a strategy. It can also be an Achilles heel, and
Yeah,
that's where it was for me too. So I'm going to come back to that if that's all right. Um, So let's actually just give some context around imposter syndrome so that people understand what it is that we're talking about, right? So I'm just getting basically a definition of it through here that I found, which is that it's defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. And this is what I was talking about before, right? Imposters suffer from chronic self doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override any feelings of success or external proof of their competence. So this is like, doesn't matter what you're achieving, it can be the highest of highs. You can still actually be feeling this. And it tends to be more common in really high achievers that don't quite accept their own achievements. So I was reading recently that Albert Einstein was a chronic sufferer of imposter syndrome. He felt this.
it's crazy.
Maya Angelou, who's a phenomenal author, she also felt that as well. And more recently, Mike Cannon Brooks, who's here in Australia, up until recently was the youngest self-made billionaire.
Oh
Runs
yeah,
an IT company called Atlassian, which has actually gone through the roof here.
yeah,
He's also talked about this. He's talked about how you can use that to your benefit. But it shows that people who have this affliction or this concept, doesn't matter what they achieve. It has to. You've got to turn the mirror inwards to have a look at why this is happening and why you have to keep doing work on yourself if this is showing up for you to move forward. Um, a researcher by the name of Hugh Kearns, who's a high performance, who actually researches in high performance at Flinders University, also here in Australia, wrote a book called The Imposter Syndrome: Why Successful People Often Feel Like Frauds. And he estimates that up to 30% of people have imposter syndrome, right? So, and it's ironic that, you would think that people who look like they've got it all would have it all, but they don't. So this is how that quite often shows up. So I'm just going to go into some ways that it may show up. Is there anything you wanted to add before I moved on, Adam? Because a
no,
lot of what you said before will make sense within this context. So some of the ways that imposter syndrome may show up is number one, as the perfectionist. Now, we've spoken about the perfectionist before and how, as a model moving forward, it's a very rigid structure, how much pressure people put on themselves. And perfectionism and imposter syndrome quite often go hand in hand, right? Because as a perfectionist, you've got exceptionally high goals and standards. And if it's not right, it's either or. And that puts a lot of pressure on people. It tends to express as control in a lot of ways. And it feels like if you want to have done something right, you've got to do it themselves. So
yeah,
if it's not 100% right, people putting it out there, they're getting all this praise and this is great. But internally they're going, I don't think that was that good, to be honest. I'm a fraud because I'm getting all these accolades, but I know it's not perfect. So that's how it'll show up. So if you ever are wondering if this is relevant to you, I've got a couple of little subtle little keys that may help. So number one, if you've ever been accused of being a micromanager, you might look at the elements of that. Like they're not all going to hit the mark, but someone who's a micromanager who's got control, perfection, teeing in there, that's how it may show up. Number two, you may have difficulty delegating. And even if you're able to do so, you still feel frustrated and disappointed with the results. So they're elements and metrics that will assist and help things out. For everybody, I just remembered as I was going on through here, we've all got these in show notes,
Yeah.
and it's going to be tedious to go through every one of these. So I'll highlight the summary of them. Please refer to the show notes if there's things that you really want to go back over and follow through. And the third component really here is by setting incredibly high standards for yourself. Do you feel that if it's not perfect, it's not right? Right. So they're the imposter overlays within perfectionism, and they link up.
Yeah. Well, like for instance, at work, we plastic wrap our cakes, and years ago when we first started, we had just the only film. Again, it was fake it till I make it. So my customer goes, "Is it going to be flow wrapped?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I went and Googled what flow wrapping was, and in that process, I found the only flow wrapper that I could find at the time. It's all right. Yeah, so I found the only flow wrapper at a time. Sorry for people. Jim just decided to kick the camera.
I'm sorry.
His long limbs are just they're flying. Anyway, so I found the only person who could do flow wrap, and they weren't the best company. And the cake would come out. Sometimes the plastic wouldn't be always centered, and my mum would sit there and go, "It's not perfect. Just throw it back." And I'm like, "If we're going to do this to 20% of our cakes, we're going to waste a lot of time, and we're not going to produce what we needed." And then every time I went to like the shops, I would see like ice cream was not wrapped perfectly. So I just buy it. And then I just show, I don't even eat ice cream. I just buy it and show her and go, "Hey, look at this packaging." And then I go to a candy bar and I go, "Hey, look at this packaging." It's not always going to be perfect. And these companies are multinational companies. I understand we're going for a standard. Yes, we're driving a standard, and now we've got a better film, and our cake is coming out perfect every time. But the thing is, sometimes this happens, and I'd rather get it done than always being perfect because you could hinder your growth because you're making sure everything's just set in stone and standard. And yes, we want everything to be perfect, but I'm not going to stop the growth of my business because of it. And yeah,
Yeah, no, it's a great example.
I just thought about that because everything had to be perfect,
Yep.
or nothing goes out. And if everything's always going to be perfect, you're not going to produce half of the stuff that you do. If even half, it could be 25%.
Yeah, and where it shows up for people is that as well too, which is really interesting in this podcast because the theme is about done is better than perfect.
Yeah,
and so we really address that. But for someone who is a perfectionist, it's going to be really challenging because, like I said, that they may put something out there that they know is not perfect, but they still get the outcome and the result or the reward, and so that messes with how you view things. So that's why it's going to plug you into feeling like you're an imposter.
Yeah.
Because you just go, hang on, I got the outcome and get the accolades. It's not going to get any more accolades. I know it's not perfect. I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
Right. So there has to be work that you need to do on yourself in order to be able to address this.
Yeah.
And we'll go through how to go about that.
Well, talking about that, when I'm on stage and I'm presenting to a group of people and I'm just up there, just cooking, just doing what I do, just talking normal conversation, answering. I normally have an MC ask me questions because sometimes the crowd is not always interactive. So we'll bounce between the crowd and the MC, and I'm answering all these questions. And I come down, and everyone's like, "Wow, that was so amazing. We're so appreciative. Thank you, thank you." And I just go, "Oh, yeah, I was just doing my job." Like, not feeling an imposter. I knew that I'm on stage for a reason, and I'll come and I'm professional and I'll just do what I do. And for me, it was just part of being. Obviously, I want to spread the word, but it was just work for me, and I was just excelling at what I do. So I come down after that and go, "Yeah, I belong here because I've put all the background work in there. I've tested these recipes. I've cooked it for people. I've gone over my speech. I've done this, and I've turned up." But yeah, at the same time, in my mind, I've gone, "Yeah, I could have said that better. I could have done this better." So there is always that back talk. But there, for me, it's not negativity, it's improvement. How do I improve next time I'm on stage? When I get asked that question, this is what I'll say next time. And that's how you get better.
Yeah. And you pretty much outlined the pathway for people to follow through, which is really important. So if one of the reasons that imposter syndrome presents itself as a perfectionist, the second way would be as what's called a superwoman or a superman. Now, by that, by virtue of what this basically says, it's, people push themselves to work harder and harder just to measure up. You talked about that before, Adam. Like, that became a metric that helped you get stuff done. But a lot of the time, for a lot of people, and this is the part that really was relevant to me, is I realized that in myself. My validation, my identity came from the fact that I projected the Superman, right? So I could outwork everybody. I could drive everybody. I could do it all. But a lot of it was coming from the point of view of going, unless I do this, I don't, and I get the outcome and reward, I feel like I deserved it.
Yeah.
Right. So where I had to do a lot of work on myself, because sometimes the part of both of us, and you touched on it earlier, and this is why I'm going to come back to this, because it can be both um, a, a, a blessing and a curse
Mm.
if you don't take the learning from it. And heaven knows I've had to do a lot of work around this to release this, because if your only reference is the only way I get this outcome and result is through hard work, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if something happens much faster, much quicker, much easier than you expected to have that done, you can't deal with it.
Mm.
Right. So this is what happens for a lot of people. So if they have overnight success and they haven't put the 25 years of hard work in there, they get to it and they go, I can't cope. I don't feel like I've deserved this. So consequently, I'm going to find a way of getting rid of it. And either they'll start sabotaging it themselves. That's when you'll see people particularly become addicted to substances to numb that feeling of basically anxiety, depression, all those kind of feelings that they can't reconcile. So the Superman component shows up for a lot of people. Like I said, this is the one that was going up for me. So for me, I would get in early, stay later, work harder than everybody else. Had a hard time having some downtime. I felt that if I wasn't being 100% productive, it wasn't the most efficient use of my time. I had to, like as I said, I've worked really hard to get to where I am, but then I also have worked really hard to release some of the identity that got me to that point, because I realized that it can't just be one dimensional, at least for me anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So there has to be a feeling goal. There has to be a feeling benefit. There has to be a metric over and above just achieving the goal for the goal's sake. And that's the big part of it. So if you're a Superman, you may not have time for hobbies and passions because you're so driven in one specific area. And that's what I'm saying in terms of that. So you get success and results outside of that without the hard work, and you don't feel like you can deserve it.
Yeah, so I totally agree with the hobbies and having time for myself, and that's where the balance comes in. And when I was saying work like crazy or be the hardest worker in the room, I mean when you're working, not all the time. When you're at work, be the hardest worker in the room, and then you take your time off, go have a weekend, do what you need to do. And one of the main things is I found that the less I actually worked or was at work, the more productive I became because I was looking after myself. And that's why when you do the 75 hard program, you're sitting there, you're worrying about your diet, you're worrying about your exercise, you're worrying about reading your books. You're taking your focus off of work, which gives you time to relax, focus on something else, look after your health and well-being, and then you're filling yourself up so that when you do come out and you go to work, you can put everything in there because you're mentally strong at that time. And I find that that's what the happy byproduct is. Your productivity goes up, and it's not just necessarily because you're on a strict regimen. It's because you're looking after yourself at the same time. And that's where when you say be the hardest worker, it can be misconstrued
Mm.
because it doesn't mean be the hardest worker every second of every day, always to your work. It's whatever you do, excel in it. But even if you're relaxing, excel at that. Just chill,
Yep.
just relax, and just the power. The power of now.
Yep.
Just sit there and be in that moment and just absorb it all in. And that's the main thing. Just sit there and just be present and always excel in what you do, even if it is relaxing.
Yeah, and 100%. And that's what that is I guess the thing about workaholism, all right, and there's a difference between out working, out grinding, out hustling, all those kind of things. But at its essence, workaholism is about some validation that comes from working, not so much the work itself, but that's the validation you get through it.
Mm,
Like the identity that you have of yourself. And I think it's really important that, like you just said, is start finding other ways to steer away from that only metric of validation. And so for me, that's what I needed to do, was basically just go, if the only avenue for me to do that is through hard work all the time, then I'm closing off the possibilities that things could happen differently, collaborating with other people easier. And so consequently, that was really it was a revelation
mm.
to be able to do that. So that's my default. My default personally is just work harder.
Yeah.
That's that, because I said that number two plugs me in to the reason why that was the case. And if I felt that I hadn't done the work, I didn't feel like I was worthy of the outcome.
Yeah. I see many things, and you touched on it in part one, like the micromanaging. I work hard to train my staff up to be able to work in a way that I don't necessarily have to always be present there and, micromanaging everything.
Mm.
And I feel like that's a way of me working hard, but not physically always working hard, because I'm training them to be able to do what I do. And then that gives me time to focus on new things, to focus on growth and all this. And that's where I take that imposter syndrome out of it, is because I come and I put ownership on everything. I'm training my staff. And that's one of the funny things, because the new staff that come in, they go, oh, the boss just sits in his office, he doesn't do anything. But then I'll come onto the line and I'll kick everyone's
Mm.
ass on there, because I belong there. I
Mm.
started at the bottom.
Mm.
And Drake's got a song, I started at the bottom, or
Mm.
we started at the bottom, now we're here.
Mm.
And that's what I always relate this back to, is if I go back on the floor, I'll kick everyone's
Mm.
ass, because I belong
Mm.
in there. But I've worked my way up, and again, I'm putting a different spin on this to make sure that I never feel like I'm an imposter.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. That's it. That's the metric. That's the solution that will help people guide them to that stage. So point number one was a perfectionist. Point number two is a superwoman and superman. So the point number three is a way of identifying if you may be experiencing elements of imposter syndrome is what's called the natural genius. And by that, people with this concept type, competence type, I should say, believe that they need to be the natural genius. So they need to be the people who are just awesome at it and brilliant at it from the outset. They get so much praise, so much validation from being fantastic, and very similar to the perfectionists. They set this incredibly high bar for themselves. So by natural geniuses, themselves who are the people who are just always good at everything, right? Who just don't look like they put any effort into it. And you might want to, if you're not really sure whether this is the case, you might ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one, are you used to excelling without much effort? Right. And if you are, they're the naturals. And this plugs a lot of people back into, the people who may not be as resilient, who may not be as talented. Sorry, they may be incredibly talented, but the moment things get really tough, they fall by the wayside because they can't handle that. They feel like, no, this isn't me. Number two, if you've got a track record of getting straight A's or gold stars in everything that you do, so this could be the natural genius in there. And if for some reason you don't, let's just say you've set high professional standards for yourself, you always get the A's and the gold stars every time. One day you get a B, you progress, but in yourself, you're there going, I didn't get the A's, I'm not good enough. This shows up. This shows up for some exceptionally highly intelligent people that I've worked with who gain validation by being the smartest person in the room. And this has happens to a lot of people when, you hear that happen where they're the smartest kid in the school. And they go to a group of other smart, super smart kids, and suddenly they're middle of the pack
Mm.
and lower in the pack. They're still knocking the lights out, but they're not in the top of the top of the top. And that really messes with people. So they quite often will say, where do I belong here? I don't feel like I belong in this area. Even though you're in the top 1% of the 1%, if you're in the bottom half of that, that actually shows up for people. It is hard to fathom for someone who doesn't set as high standards for themselves as some people do, but this is quite debilitating for a lot of people.
Yeah. I can see it. I can see, and you can see with people when they talk to you about it, you can see
Yep.
how it actually affects them mentally.
Yep.
And then obviously almost everything mentally trickles over into physically.
Yep.
And that comes through stresses,
Yep.
even if it's not something physical like weight gain, it comes through, your body is under stress. You can
Yep.
feel it. And I'm sure you feel it way more when you're
Yep.
adjusting
Yep.
people. You can, like today when I got in, you could feel my body was stressed. And that was because I had such a long 2 weeks
Mm.
and just mentally and physically just been, it's all built up.
Yep.
Um, but I just wanted to touch on a point here. I was watching a TikTok because,
Mhm.
that's all I
Good
do.
old TikTok.
And
That's what you're doing up in the office, right? So
that's it.
is
It's
that what
just,
you're doing?
yeah,
So
yeah.
people there going, I'm busting my butt on the production line floor. And that boss up there you were talking about, he's
Yeah.
just watching TikTok videos.
Yeah, the imposter
The
up
imposter
there
up
in the
there.
office is watching TikTok. But I was talking about a guy who runs a Navy SEALs training, and the number one question he gets asked is who makes it through SEALs training, and he goes, that football star, the top of the table, the guy who's always had everything handed to him, has got scholarships, has done all this, has excelled in so many parts of his life. That's generally the person who fails.
Yeah. They're usually the first ones.
Yeah, yeah. It's the people, male or female, who have had, all this adversity growing up. They've always had to work hard to get
Mm.
anything in their life because they were never given anything. They're the ones who normally succeed.
Yeah.
And they succeed more than the naturally talented or the natural geniuses.
Yeah.
It's just because they got that work ethic.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't mean crazy work all the time. Just that ethic, just be the hardest worker.
And it's really interesting because in both of those examples, right, if you are only ever working hard, you can succeed and still feel like an imposter syndrome, imposter. If you're the person who always succeeds and suddenly you get through, but it wasn't as easy, or oh, sorry, it wasn't the way you thought it would be. You get through, you still feel imposter. So there's
Yeah.
multiple avenues that this can express itself from different ways. So, but yeah, when we overlay things like um, fixed versus growth mindset, we focus on resilience and all the things that you talk about. That's exactly right. It's the I've read that as well too about the people who are most likely to give up, particularly in buds
Yeah.
and SEAL training, are usually the people that have just basically it's been a walk in the park their whole life, and yet some guy or girl who's always had issues with their fitness, their weight, their they've been a minority person who's had resilience and stuff. They had to look after their grandmother because their parents, they're the ones that actually get through these programs because they've been preparing for their whole life.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating.
That was in the book Grit by
Great. Yeah, Angela Duckworth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's a fantastic book, and it's a study of that.
Toughest book I've ever read in my life. I feel like she made it super boring
It
just
was
to give you grit.
It was a hard one. Like I remember thinking the same thing. Actually, it was like grit is what I am for. I remember talking to you about that. It's like grit is what I'm persevering with to get through this book.
Yeah.
Does it have to be this tough and boring? Can you give me the highlights without all the tough bits? So
Yeah.
that was Angela's little comeuppance for anybody who's working through that. So if the first three we mentioned were the perfectionist, number two was the Superman or Superwoman, number three ways that you may be expressing imposter syndrome is the natural genius. The fourth way that you may be expressing imposter syndrome is acting as what's called the soloist. And the soloist, by explanation, is people who, through asking for help, or actually, let me rephrase that, people who feel that asking for help reveals their phoniness. So they're not actually as good as they think they are. And these people become fiercely independent to the point where it compromises your effectiveness. It's okay to be independent, but if you're doing it at the extent that you're refusing assistance so that you can prove your worth, this is what we're talking about. There's this joke that a lot of female friends of mine keep bringing back to me about men and asking for directions. They don't like the idea that they don't have this inbuilt GPS system. It's a joke, but with every joke, there's an element of truth in them, right? And this one's been a little bit of my area to work on there as well too, feeling that I've had to do it all by myself.
Yeah.
And if I didn't do it all by myself, there was something either deficient or didn't feel like I was as good as I could be. So that puts a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah.
And to do that. And when you feel that you have to ask for help, you feel like an imposter, you feel like that's the case. And the funny story at our house is anybody who knows me knows I'm not incredibly handy. Um, basically,
I've
uh,
seen you change a light bulb.
it's only because I'm usually the tallest bloke around, but around our house, I'm not. My wife, beautiful Bettina, has grown up on a farm,
Yeah,
and the running joke in our family is the toolbox is hers,
yeah,
right? I just carry it from one place to the other, and so I remember a really blokey bloke friend of mine came over to our house one time, and um, he said to me, "Look, have you got blah, 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 where's your shed?" I go, "Look, I don't have a shed," and he said, "Okay, well, look, let me help you with this, washing machine, whatever. Can you get me your toolbox?" I said, "Look, I don't have a toolbox. My wife does," right? And he just looked at me in the most patronizing alpha male way, and he said, "Dude, you don't have a ute,
yeah,
you don't have a shed, you don't have a toolbox. You're not much of a bloke, are you, really?"
yeah.
And that that was tough to tolerate, but I'm okay with it. So, but if I was the person who was so worried about that, it's really interesting. I can be fiercely independent in one area, another area. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I know I'm not handy at all. Um, if I tried to do it all by myself and didn't logically ask for help in that area, goodness knows what things would look like around in our home. A breakdown would just be me trying to tinker away, and it just wouldn't work. So
It's
in
all
that scenario,
practice.
it is, and sometimes it's practice. Sometimes it's the identity you have. Sometimes it's an interest, because to learn something you got to have an interest in it, and I haven't had an interest in it, so that's part of the reason why. But
One
that
of the things for me is I'm not a tradesperson in terms of construction. I'm a tradesperson as a cook. Um, but currently we're doing renovations at our house. So painting the doors, changing hinges, setting door handles, installing downlights, changing light switches, all this stuff. I'd never done it before, but I'm like, it's mine to ruin if I want to
Mm,
ruin it.
mm,
Like, but I'm learning these skills, and YouTube's amazing. You can
mm,
see anything on
mm,
YouTube, and I've seen how do you change over the light switches, which I've done 1 month of an electrical apprenticeship, so I
mm,
have some
mm.
loose knowledge on red means active, black means negative, green means earth. Don't mix them up.
Yeah,
And that's about it. But turn off all the power in the house before
yeah,
we do
yeah,
anything. But it's practice and
yeah,
it's mine to ruin.
yeah,
But at the same time, I could be sitting on the couch doing nothing,
yeah,
or I could be actively learning
yeah.
how to build my
Yeah, but
toolbox,
Adam,
metaphoric toolbox.
but that's how your brain processes stuff,
Yeah.
right? It's really that's in like, to me, I just look at that and I go, look, it's not an area that I'm passionate about, and if I spend 65 hours that somebody else can spend an hour doing, that's not the best use of my that's
Yeah.
that's the only metric that I use it. But there are other areas that I am dogged in, and I want to learn in, because I have an area of interest in. So that's the pathway. But like, even in, for people who are listening to the podcast, you've brought that strategy to everything about this podcast. We've got equipment here that you didn't know how to basically incorporate, but you worked it through. That's actually a success tool that you use. Um, Not so much a inefficient one, but that's how your brain processes, and you break it down. And I learned from that, because yes, there are parts of my world I do exactly that in there. But number one, there's got to be an interest factor.
Yeah.
But number two, that's not that's not how my brain always works in all areas. So that's why for me it's a case of I'm using efficiency and going, no, that's not going to work. I'll electrocute myself. I'll kill myself doing something. So it's better for
Hey,
me.
being electrocuted is no fun. I've done
no,
that before.
no, you don't want to. You don't want to do
I've
that.
done that.
So so getting back to what I was saying about being the independent person here is how it'll show up for a lot of people is that and it comes down to someone who may not feel good enough in themselves, right? So that's what I wanted to make a distinction, because you use it as a success tool. You use it to satisfy your natural curiosity about how it works, and in the process you get it and you practice it and you refine it and you get better and better, faster at it. But I'm talking about people who are constantly doing courses, getting certifications, feeling that that additional training will make them feel worthy of or good enough for whatever role that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I said, there's a big distinction between what you're doing because to me, like I said, that's a success tool and a success strategy, and that serves you well. But the person who does one course after another, after another, after another, and still doesn't feel smart enough or good enough, this is what we're talking about.
It's like when I was at uni, and the reason I dropped out was because, again, I was learning about management while I was doing management. And I was like, this course is not going to help me because I'm already doing this. And so many times I hear people going through their courses and they'll finally get the dream job that they wanted to. That's what they did all the courses for. They get the job and they're like, I know nothing here. And that's where the
Yep.
imposter syndrome
Yep.
comes in, because they're like, I've just spent 6 years doing 3 courses or 2 courses. And now walked into the workplace. Yeah, I'm accredited, but I can't translate
Yeah,
any
what
of
the
these
hell am I
skills.
doing
Yeah,
here? I've got no idea.
yeah, there's no, I wasn't trained for this.
Yep. Yep.
And yeah, imposter syndrome comes from there,
Correct.
which I completely
Yeah,
understand.
and and there's a difference between basically saying, you know what, no matter, and this is where confidence and certainty and all those kind of things come in. And interestingly, in a huge part of my world, I do that, right? Where I go, no matter what will happen, I'll back myself.
Yeah.
Except obviously when there's something mechanical, but I will find a way, and that becomes a self fulfilling prophecy in that regard. And there's, coming back to that, there's no shame in asking for help. And that's what I do is if I look at this and go, is out of the area of interest, specialty, and specialization, I'll go, listen, who do I know who can help me with this? Who's better, faster, more efficient at doing that? I'm going to leverage my time. That's the avenue that I use. I use it as my success strategy and tool.
Yeah.
Is to basically recruit, to collaborate, to bring other people on board who will actually get me, a much better outcome than I could do by myself.
Which I totally agree with as
Yeah.
well. It's a good way to do it. Delegating and not micromanaging.
Yeah.
Not saying I can do everything.
Yeah. So, if you can imagine, what would some of the effects be that we would have as a result of being someone who experiences imposter syndrome? And I talked about them a little bit earlier on. What you might find is someone who's experiencing imposter syndrome, number one, may experience anxiety, right? So they're anxious about the situation, not feeling like they're good enough, not feeling like they know enough, not feeling like they have the respect or the understanding or the appreciation of other people because they're looking at them thinking, what are you doing here? Right. So this is where it plays out in terms of anxiety. Number two, it can show up as depression. Okay. Where people are so overwhelmed with what's going on, so overwhelmed with the narrative and the story they're telling about themselves, about what this means and who they are, it can lead them down the cycle of depression. I've seen that happen quite a bit. And a lot of people I've worked with, it's about changing that and rewiring the brain. And what you were talking earlier on about, Adam, is how you've done that. Is you've redirected the neural circuitry in an area that serves you. Right. That's the pathway. The third one, which is really interesting, is the discounting praise. So you quite often see someone go, "Hey man, you're really good at this." Oh no. Look, no, it's nothing. It's just no, it's just practice.
Yeah.
Right. I'm pointing it at them as I'm talking about that, but that's what a lot of people do. Is you deflected that because you go, yeah, well it is practice, but that's different to someone who goes, no, it's not that good really.
Yeah.
Right. There's a difference, right? Because you're doing it because you're like, yeah, man, it's not a big deal.
It's what I trained for.
That's what I trained for. I've been doing this, right?
This is why I turn up every day.
Correct. So that's a distinction between someone who goes, no, that's not good enough. I'm sure I could do better. I could. That's where people discount their achievements, and that sort of keeps that cycle going of they're not good enough, and that keeps that whole explanation going in their mind. And the fourth way that happens for a lot of people, which I mentioned earlier on, is self-sabotage. So by self-sabotage, we're talking, it can be a whole lot of ways. If you are getting great results and outcomes doing one particular type of behavior and action, suddenly you'll stop doing it. Suddenly you go, okay, the wheels fall off. And when you were disciplined, you're now not disciplined. And people go, I don't get it, man. You're turning up 20 minutes early every day. You're making all the calls. You're doing everything you're saying. What happened? Now you're half an hour late. You're not putting in the effort, not putting in the work. What happened? What's going on there? Sometimes what happens, they got an outcome, but they hadn't reconciled it within themselves well enough to be able to own it, to feel it, to embody it, to make it as part of their identity. So consequently, they found a way to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And so consequently, either their behaviors started changing or they started adopting habits that they let go of that bring in there to bring them back to the level of identity or level of self-esteem that they had before that outcome.
Well, you mentioned like Sunny syndrome,
Yep.
but there's also like I don't know how to describe it. I'm sure you've got a terminology, but when you've reached some type of success, but your whole friendship group
Yep.
isn't at that same level, and you feel bad because you're the
Yep.
higher excelling one,
Yep.
and then you're like, actually, I'm gonna lose my friends. I don't have much time for them anymore. So you start self sabotaging to go. Actually, you know what? I don't really need too much of that. I was
Yep.
happy
Yep.
with these,
Yep.
and I'm not sure the
Well,
terminology.
I'll tell probably the best way I can explain that is in Marianne Williamson's Man's Greatest Fear.
You're like a library
All
man.
right, but man's greatest fear. No,
Yeah.
but she says because man's greatest fear, and this is the one that President Nelson Mandela used in his inauguration speech, when he says man's greatest fear is not that he's inadequate, but it is powerful beyond measure. It's not, and then a little bit further down, she says, "There's nothing noble about shrinking, so others feel insecure around you," and that's exactly what you're talking
Yeah.
about. Because when you're the tallest person in the group, you don't want to stand up and stand out, so you shrink, you drop it down further to make sure everybody else around you it doesn't feel insecure around you, or you don't feel like you stand out.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what that is.
But yeah, it's a side effect from being an imposter because you're like, oh, I've grown up with all these people.
Yeah,
Now I'm excelling because I've put in the work or I've put in the time. But now I'm no longer with my friends. So I'm
yeah,
an imposter in this new world. So
yeah,
I'll just go back.
yeah. And sometimes, John C. Maxwell, which I talked about, I think last time, says he has a saying that says it's sometimes you've got to give up to go up,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes giving up is the habits, the behaviors, the people, the associations that allow you to step up and grow up and get up to the highest level that you're talking about.
Well, one of the quotes I live my life by is Ernest Hemingway saying, true nobility. I'm going to butcher the quote, but true nobility is being better than your previous
Yeah,
self, not better than
yeah,
your man."
yeah,
Or yeah, I'm
yeah,
sure I'll look it up
yeah.
one day and get it right. But yeah, that's how I live my life. Is I don't judge myself against other people. I just want to be the best version of me every day. I need to be better,
Yeah.
and then that means that I'm not an imposter because every day I know I'm going to be better,
Mm,
and that's where I'm leading my life. And I don't judge anyone else if they want to be how they are and they're happy.
mm.
Who am I to say anything
Yeah,
different?
yeah,
And it's like my cousins, they're constantly going, "Oh, you got to move to Brisbane. It's a better lifestyle. It's a slower lifestyle. You get to enjoy yourself and do that." I'm happy. They're like, "But Melbourne's cold." I'm
yeah,
like, "Yeah, Melbourne's cold, but it's got so much more opportunity for
yeah,
what I
yeah,
need in my life.
yeah,
If I will go up to Brisbane, I'm not going to be satisfied.
yeah,
I'm sure I could make it work,
yeah.
but yeah, but they're happy
Mm.
and that's it. And if they came here, they wouldn't be happy either. And they again, you're becoming, I don't know, you're living out of your core values, I think.
Yeah. No, good point. Good point. So, Adam, let's give people some action steps that they can incorporate and use. So, if you are in the 30% of people who may feel or may have experienced imposter syndrome or some elements of what we spoke about today resonated with you, there's some action steps that could really help you to let go of this process. Like I've shared in my journey, I've been able to move on from this. And as Adam had mentioned, the strategies that he just has done, which are actually the solutions for people. So the first step would be just to break your silence, and that is just talk about what's going on. By me sharing this, and this is not the first time that I've shared this story um, in this podcast, yes, but in other forums, other platforms, I've spoken about this, and I'm stunned at the number of people who come up and go, "Wow, I actually thought it was just me." And by communicating, by talking about what's going on for you, you let it go. I quite often say, a problem shared is a problem halved. And it's exactly that. You voice it, you communicate it, you let that go. And it's so much better, so much easier. So
Step one is admitting you have a problem.
yeah, pretty much, pretty much.
It's
And
like
step
AA.
admitting it and
Yeah.
communicating it,
Yeah.
right? So breaking the silence is step one. Step two is separating feelings from facts. Right. This is a big one. So the story you tell yourself may not be true. And is there, it's really important that you ask yourself, is there any fact in what I'm saying? Or is it just me BSing me? Or is it me just talking to myself and choosing this story? Is there any merit in what I'm basically saying? Right.
Yeah.
It's really important You had a look that said you had something to add there?
I was just in my head.
Okay.
No. What I was thinking is that anytime you talk about feelings and facts, it's removing emotions from words.
Yep.
And what do you need
Perfect.
to do today? This is it. Don't worry if you feel tired. Don't worry if you don't want to turn up. Don't worry if it's something that's negative, but ultimately will lead to something positive. Just
Yep.
do it. Like remove the emotions from the word. And then I thought of another word, but it's yeah. Anyway, but yeah, just remove that feeling. Again, it's that story that you tell
Mm.
yourself because you start once you start telling yourself a story using certain words, the words that emotionally
Yep.
activate you.
Mm.
You've just got to remove it and just go,
Yep.
what do I do? And that's why when you're on a workout program, you go, this is what I have to do. And there's no emotion. It's like it's calculated, everything. Wake up at this time, do this, eat like this, move on, goodbye. That's it. And
Yep.
there's no emotions. It's just clinical.
And that in and of itself is the journey as well, right? Because being able to separate feelings from facts are important. But you're 100% right. Being able to separate and ask yourself, is this really true, or is it just me just because I'm not feeling great about myself that I'm telling myself that it's true? Is it really true? If you get to core truth in that regard, that's really helpful as well. So we're talking about breaking silence as step one, separating feelings from facts, step two. The third one is to recognize that there are times when you're going to do things and you're a pioneer. There are going to be times where no one's done what you've done before and you don't have a reference. And it's going to feel normal to feel uncomfortable, unusual because you're breaking ground. And that's okay. If for example, if you're one of the first women or men in a minority in a field or a workplace, it's only natural you're going to sometimes feel that you don't fit in, right? But instead of taking your self-doubt as a sign of ineptness, recognize that it's a normal response quite often to be an outsider or doing something no one else has done before, and being okay with it. But coming from the point of going, look, I'm doing things that someone, my gender, my age, my experience has never done before. But what I know is I'm going to bring the best version of myself to it. I'm going to grow into that state and role, like you talked about before, Adam, where you're in situations you've never been in before, but you set that intention to go, look, whatever it happens, I'm going to bring that version of me forward, not the person who gets the outcome but still feels incomplete or not good enough. Great.
Yeah, and that's how you can grow.
Yep.
Is I love being put in situations I know nothing about, even if I don't belong there. That's as I said, I embrace the imposter. I love being in different situations because I know ultimately I'm going to learn a new skill, so that if I ever go into a room again and I get called up and go, "Hey, I need this done," I go, "Yeah, sure," because I got that base skill.
Mm.
It might not be the best. And you know what? I might have only spent 20 hours doing it, but I got some base knowledge and I'll walk up. If someone goes to me, how do you change a doorknob now? I can go up and change a door handle and I can chisel out the holes and I can pre-drill all this. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't do this. But now if I ever have to do, if my grandmother goes, oh, my door handle's not working, can you have a look at it? Yeah, sure. I can fix it. And then that's me not being an imposter anymore. It's not me looking at a door handle going, how do I fix this? It's not because I want to be able to do everything. It's if I get asked, I want to be able to have some
Yep.
input. And yeah, I love being that person and I'm using something that's already there, but I love being that pioneer. I love being that person who's able to grow all the
Yep.
time.
Yep. No, good point. So the fourth point would be to accentuate the positive experiences you've had in the past that you can use as fuel for your current experience. So you might go, I may not have done this before, but where else in my life was I in a situation where I didn't know what I needed to do and I found a way? Or where else was I unsure, but I found a way to find a solution? So if you're looking for references in your past that you've had similar situations or similar, I guess, feelings, and you've overcome those, or or you basically found a way to overcome that feeling. How did you do that? And the more references that you can actually find that you can draw from, it builds on that bank account of your esteem and your worthiness in that will help you um, address the imposter syndrome that we're talking about. Okay. So we talked about the ways of the action steps we mentioned is breaking the silence, number one, separating feelings from facts, number two, recognize there are times where you're going to be a pioneer. We said that you've just got to find um, that other ways that, sorry, let me rephrase that question. And number three is recognize there are times where you're a pioneer. No one's done what you're doing before. So it's pretty normal to having those feelings. The fourth scenario is accentuate the positive through experiences you've had before. Number five is to change the meaning to assign that you assign to setbacks or perceived failures. Henry Ford quite often said that failure is only the opportunity to begin again, but more intelligently. And this is a lot of what you were talking about before too, Adam, where you're learning, you're basically course correcting, you're finding more skills, more tools. Oh, that wasn't the strategy that we could use. Maybe we can do something differently. We should do this, we should do that. And in the process of that toing and froing back and forth, you come up with great outcome solutions that help you move forward.
Yeah, and it's like Einstein. Einstein said doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result
Yeah.
is insanity. That's the definition of insanity. And you've got to change your courses constantly, be adaptive, and you change the meanings for setbacks or perceived failures to something, as you said, bring it back to a positive situation you've done in the past. How can you apply something that worked out positive into this new situation? Because what you're currently doing might not be working.
Mm.
And you build confidence that way because you go, yeah, I've done this in this situation. How do I bring it to the new situation? uh, Sorry, I just knocked the mic, but yeah, that's how I see that as well,
Yeah.
just constantly adapting to different situations. But because I've had so much success in the past in different fields, I have confidence because I've built up constantly. I've just keep building a strong base. And we talk about building a strong base all the time.
Yeah.
Once you've built a strong base, you can go to a new situation and go, hey, I might not know much, but I know some.
Yeah.
I know that if I work hard, I'll learn the skills needed.
Yeah, and I really I take a lot out of that. In Henry Ford's example, I'm always also reminded of Thomas Edison, who famously has said when he was asked by a reporter, "What's it feel like to fail 1,000 times in trying to find out work out a light bulb?" He goes, "Fail? I didn't fail. I just found 1,000 ways not to do it." And that's what we're talking about. Is if you change the significance and the story around the perception of the setback or failure, you're not carrying it as a ball and chain with you moving forward. You're actually looking at it and going, okay, that wasn't the strategy. That wasn't the strategy. And eventually you'll find the solution.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
really helpful. So point number six, and we've touched on this before, and it's I guess it's a recurring theme of our podcast is change the story you tell yourself about yourself and what you're capable of. I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory in terms of what we've covered before, but specifically, Adam, this is what you were doing earlier on. You were changing the story you tell yourself about yourself. You're in scenarios that you haven't actually seen before, or you're moving into. You're changing the narrative around what that. And that was a perfect example. You parachuted straight into point number six, which for a lot of us takes us a while to get that understanding. And that is what I meant by that becomes a success strategy that you've been incorporating. You've taken on board, go, yeah, that's just what you do. And that's served you well. And for some people, they've needed to find that out the hard way.
And I guess I would have done it when I was younger. I would
Mm,
have just found that mindset. But I was always in martial arts from
mm,
a very young age. I was always very active, and I was always having to find out stuff, and then saying I'm here, and that's it. And I might have done it when I was young and been very fortunate, and now that's just second nature.
mm,
But also, I think like because I'm constantly learning and constantly doing a lot of personal development. Tony Robbins says you should start with the solution and then work out how to get
mm,
there.
mm,
And that's how I sort of live my life is how and this is where I'm going with it is that's the story that you tell
mm.
yourself. What do you want to do? Do you want to run a business? Yeah, sure. If you don't want to run a business, do you want to reach a certain level in someone's business? All right, now how do you get there? And no BS. Don't bullshit yourself. How do you get to that position? That's the story you need to tell, and that's the story you need to live. And it becomes that simple. What's the result? How do you get there? And that's the story you should tell yourself.
Good, good. And that leads us to the next point, point number 7, that helps people work through imposter syndrome, and that is the art of visualization.
It's like you've set these out on purpose.
They're intentional. There's a logical sequence for them. So effective, at least in my mind anyway. When I outline this, I've just gone, okay, well, how do we communicate this? How do we build on this? And how to allow people to get to one point, get clear on that, and then move to the next one. But definitely visualization um, is really important. A lot of professional athletes always um, focus on visualizing the, standing up on the dais with a gold medal around their neck. And then you have ridiculous reporters coming up to people and going, "Wow, this is amazing! Did you ever dream that this had ever possibly happen?" They're like, "Duh! I've been visualizing this for years, man." Like,
I just did 10 years of training,
yeah,
never thinking I was ever going to win a gold medal. Never
yeah,
thought about this in my
yeah.
life.
I'm always fascinated because the athletes are incredulous. They look at the
Yeah.
reporter quite often and go, "Of course, this is who doesn't." But this is really important. So if you wanting to cycle through and I did a lot of this myself. There's the visualization is not so much visualizing the outcome, but is visualizing the emotion. That was another one because you actually go, you can visualize anything. You can walk into a room and there's everything you've ever wanted in that room, but you can visualize how you feel about that as well. You can internalize and embody that feeling and get an experience about what that feels like, what that sounds like, and that can basically pre-program your nervous system to be able to be comfortable with it when it finally does arrive.
You took the words right out of my
Did
mouth.
I?
We talk about stripping emotions from words, right?
Yep.
But when you visualize, you need to empower that visualization with emotion. You need to have that feeling. It's like if you dream of having and building your dream house, you need to visualize the house. You need to visualize you putting your key in the door. How does that make you feel? Unlocking the door. How does it make you feel walking in the house, smelling the fresh paint, seeing the walls painted in the exact manner that you've wanted, the floorboards or the carpet or the tiles that you've got laid? How does that make you feel? Do your feet feel nice and furry on the carpet? And then that will start programming your brain to
Mm.
want these things. And subconsciously, it'll happen because you've put such a heavy emotion onto that visualization that you can move forward going, this is exactly what I've pictured in my mind, from the smells to the feels to the sight. It becomes your reality because you've put so much emotion behind it. And it might not happen this year, it might not happen next year, but it will happen because you're putting so much energy and emphasis in there.
Mm.
And that's for something physical. But it's the same thing as if you're stepping into a boardroom. How are you going to deliver your speech? Are you going to be full of confidence? Are you going to go, yes, this is my category. This is my field. I am an expert in this. I will present it in such a way. And your demeanor changes.
Mm.
And you've done this so many times. And you're going to think about how you deliver the words and the emotion and the energy you're putting towards it. And then when you go into the boardroom, you'll kick ass because you've already done that speech so many times in your head. You haven't overthought it.
Mm.
You've put a purpose and an emotion to everything you've set to it. Make sure you do it positively.
Yep.
That's just
Yeah,
that's just a
true.
little caution at the bottom. Just always do that positively because you'll get it. And if you're thinking negatively, it'll come negative back to you.
Thanks, Adam. Um,
You're
so we're
you're
at point
welcome, Jim.
point 8. No, I just meant thank you for adding that. That's what I didn't mean to sound patronising.
No, no, no.
Point number 8, because like I said to you, I don't do things subtly. I just short sword straight away. If I've got something to say, I'll say it straight away. Point number 8 that we talked about as ways of helping you address your um, imposter syndrome if it's showing up for you is to focus on the validation, internal validation, by making regular self-esteem deposits in yourself. So acknowledging the process, acknowledging the effort, acknowledging elements of that for yourself, and not just the outcome, not just I got that result. So focus on the emotions that we talked about. Focusing on, hey, I feel really good about myself because I'm putting effort into it. I feel good about myself because I'm doing this. I feel great, and the more you validate self as opposed to just externally having that, that helps build up your esteem along the way. So when you finally get those results and outcomes, you're there. You've matched it energetically and vibrationally with what you've got. And so there's no disconnect. There's no gradient deficiency. They're basically at an even level. And so consequently you can hold on to them. You don't feel like you have to sabotage them. You don't have to feel like you minimize yourself to feel comfortable. It's really an important process. It's not just a outcome, it's the person that you need to keep expanding and growing like a balloon. You got to keep expanding and growing in your esteem along the way to be able to hold on to and to um, feel comfortable with the success that comes with your way as a result of your energy and efforts.
My balloon doesn't fit through the door, mate. It's just constantly building that.
And stay away from people who want to pop your balloon, right?
You know how they said
Yeah,
you get a big
yeah,
head and
yeah.
can't fit through the door? That's me every time.
Stay away
It's
from
just
people who want to pop your balloon. All right. So point number 9, we've spoke about this before in terms of your esteem, but it's focusing on excellence versus perfection. All right. So Adam, you've outlined perfect examples just by way of what you do in terms of your journey towards excellence, and it's that process of never-ending improvements. Oh, how can I do this? Or okay, I found out a way. This doesn't work. I'll keep going again. It's not a either I'm perfect or I'm not. So if you focus on excellence and being okay with doing the best you can and being comfortable with that, the next version of that will get better and better. So you don't load the basis up for yourself, feeling the wrath of perfectionism and imposter syndrome all at the same time.
well, all right. I'll bring another practical example. Last year, we launched our line of Christmas puddings, and it was 8 months in the making. And we did small scale stuff, and then we did a big scale test and trial, and it took us 8 months to get there. And we finally got the contract over, but we are cooking in a typical baking oven. And what we were doing is like throwing water at the base of the oven because these are giant ovens. Like 2 or 3 humans can walk in there, and we were throwing the water in, and it would steam up naturally, right? And I was never happy with the product. Like it was good, but it wasn't what I envisioned. But we still sold 130,000 puddings last year. First thing I did this year was buy a new oven,
Mm.
an oven that could steam the whole way through. And then we've just done Christmas puddings this week, and the staff we were all like, wow, these puddings are so much better than last year.
Mm.
And if we constantly waited for perfection, we wouldn't have done last year's ones, and we wouldn't have learnt how to do this year's ones. And I'm still not happy with this
Yeah.
year. We're still going to grow next year, and we're going to change. And that's what I was saying. I'll go, and they were saying this is what we did last year in terms of the packaging and the codes and all this. This is what we did last year. I go, yeah, but we need to be better. And yeah, all right, we've done it, and that's how we did it, and it was successful. But how do we improve it? And you constantly have to move on, and that's where excellence is good. If I constantly wait for perfection, I wouldn't have done half the things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. No, spot on. Spot on. So those 9 points are the action steps that will help people transition from an imposter syndrome or if something is showing up for you towards being able to retain and maintain, I should say, their level of esteem and feel good about themselves while they're in those scenarios. So just as we close out, this is actually for like you mentioned, and I really appreciate at the start, you said, look, I haven't got a reference for this, and that's okay. Because we said it's 30% of people that'll show up. It happens a lot for women. It happens a lot for men as well too. But particularly for the people, and there is an intellectual component in there as well too for people. So they're always seeking that validation. But if you do experience that, if you do experience that, um, you're getting situations where you're not able to feed in and of itself. Look at this. Look at this scenario. Perhaps talk to people about what's going on for you and look at the personal growth and development element of that. You can keep trying to feed the beast by getting more certifications and awards and degrees and whatever when the actual source of the solution may be to look within. And most times people don't want to look within because it's harder, it's more painful, it's more work, it's more exposing, it's more vulnerable. But ultimately, that was the pathway, and that was my experience in terms of being able to break out of that, and it's been just fantastic. So now now I chase my own curiosity. My curiosity may be different areas to your curiosity, and that's okay. But I chase my own curiosity, not from a perspective of I'm so far behind the pack that I have to do this. And when I get the outcome, I'm still not good enough. Because as I said very early on, that was the drive, was I had to work harder for, as you said, to feel like I deserved a place at the table. But now it's because I've done all that work on myself to be able to be comfortable in it. I've let that go. And by me sharing that story, there may be one person out there who may not have owned that to themselves or admitted that to themselves. Hopefully that's given you enough permission to realize that it's not just you. There's a whole lot of people out there who may have journeyed in that same pathway as well. And just by sharing that and making it a podcast episode, it may be the pathway for you to move forward.
Thank you.
So I'm done. Are there any final comments for you, Adam, before we wrap up this episode?
I was thinking about something earlier, just it's a little bit off the topic, but just with everything that's going on in the world, just make sure you love each other, because there's a lot of hate going around for people wearing masks, people not wearing masks, people not believing this, race riots, all that. Just love everyone, and just please realize, same thing as imposter syndrome. Everyone has a different beginning and a different background. Just know that there's a lot of scared people out there at the moment. They're not understanding what's happening. Fear runs a lot of this, and just make sure you're understanding. Check in on your mates. I know in the second lockdown, there's been less Zoom calls around. There's been less phone calls, less messaging. Everyone in Melbourne's a bit sick of the second lockdown, but just check in on everyone. Just make sure you share love. And again, imposter syndrome is because people hold in, like you said, step one, make sure you share it. So this is all tied in together. Just ask everyone if they're all right. Just show love, and just ask people how they're going mentally, because I think everyone's struggling a little bit now. Yeah. I've noticed it with a lot of people. So just show love and support.
Great way to finish off there, Adam.
I know that wasn't really the imposter syndrome, but I think that needed to be said.
You know, that's an authentic communication of where you're at, and that's your message you want to share to listeners. So I think that's fair call. Yeah. I think it's really good. It's very coming from heart too. So you can feel that when you communicate that. So thank you, Adam, once again for podcast, and thank you once again for everybody for joining us. It was just a reminder that you can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and the extended Launch and Beyond community on these channels. Please post any questions or comments you have about the podcast or anything you'd like to support with. Quite often, a lot of your thoughts and questions may trigger off other solutions or learnings for other people. It'd be great if you just put them forward and share them, and we could start a conversation going around those. The dialogue may have a huge ripple effect that you may not even realize just how big that will be. And if you're enjoying the podcast finally and finding value in it, we'd be really grateful if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review. This will allow us to reach a larger audience and help more people. So from me, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.